Ladies and gentlemen, here we bring you our next session. Introducing Mr. Jatin Singh, founder and CEO, Skymet Weather Services Private Limited. Up next, we have Mr. Vinod Kumar Duggal, former member, National Disaster Management Authority. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? Just a change of tempo. Thank you. Up next, we have Mr. Jairam Ramesh, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha. Up next, we have Dr. B.P. Yadav, Deputy Director General, Indian Meteorological Department. And as our moderator, we have the renowned journalist, Ms. Jyoti Malhotra. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank, first of all, Mr. Sunil Munjal for this ongoing discussion on the ideas of India and whose India is it. We've already had introductions to our panel. Mr. Jatin on my extreme left, Jairam Ramesh, Vinod, and Mr. Yadav on my extreme right. The topic of our session is Nature's Fury, the New World Order. And of course, there is a question mark at the end of that topic. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask each of my panelists to look beyond the debate that has been raging in India and across the world over the last 20 years in terms of common but differentiated responsibility. This is a phrase that several of you know is part of the jargon around climate change, about how the confrontation, if you like, between India and China, key leaders of the developing world within quotes, and the Western world. The argument being that the Western world pollutes much more, that emissions from the Western world are much, much higher than those of the developing world, and that they must have a responsibility in terms of transferring funds or technology to be able to reduce the harmful impact of climate change. But I'm wondering if my panel can take this discussion beyond that argument and ask what India can do. If India believes it is a leading power, or at least a regional power, and takes responsibility for this region, what is it that India can do to push the envelope and to mitigate and reduce the impact of climate change? So I'd like to start with Jairam. Jairam Ramesh, you've been a lead negotiator in the UPA years with the Americans, with Todd Stern, and we all know the arguments you had with them. But can I briefly ask you to talk about what you think? How is it that India can think out of the box and push the envelope in terms of reducing the harmful impacts of climate change?
Well, I think India's position in the last 6 years has certainly evolved. And today, we are not prisoners of the old rhetoric that we used to hear many years ago, particularly this rhetoric that India's per capita emissions are very low and that we should be governed by the principle, as you say, of common but differentiated responsibilities. So India has, over the years, starting with Copenhagen in 2009, and most recently in Paris in 2015, and tomorrow, in fact, the agreement is going to be signed in New York. India has come a long way. But India has come a long way in relation to what it was, not necessarily what it should be, not in the normative sense that you ask. I think one of the problems, of course, that India faces is that we need, like no other country in the world, we need accelerated, fast economic growth. We can't afford to grow at anything less than 7.5% to 8% per year. And that is inevitably going to impose an environmental cost. It's going to impose a cost in terms of pollution, in terms of deforestation, in terms of contamination, and so on. So the big challenge for us really is how do you sustain a high economic growth while at the same time ensuring that your environmental objectives are fulfilled, that the integrity of the growth process ecologically is maintained. And now this is a big challenge for us. And I think one of the problems we have in thinking out of the box is that we see for ourselves a trade off between economic growth and environmental protection. And we, more often than not, we are likely to give priority and precedence to objectives of growth over environmental protection. I think the big issue in India really relates to coal consumption. In most other issues, India has come a long way, but it's only in relation to the use of coal that I think we have been very conservative. We have been rather, I would say, niggardly in our own approach towards our future generations, and our big challenge really is how do you sustain this high economic growth while at the same time ensuring that you don't repeat the coal consumption trajectory of the US or of China in the last 25 to 30 years. That's my answer to your question. That if there is one area where we need to think out of the box, it's in relation to the use of coal.
Thanks, Jairam. I'll ask you later to answer your own question, which is how do you get out of this Pandora's box on sort of increasing economic growth versus or protecting your own environment. But Jatin, can I ask you to take up this conversation? You know, I'm a journalist and I've just come back from Bengal after traveling a week in Bengal, and actually you see the impact of climate change very, very closely as farmers and as you know, large parts of Bengal are thirsty for water. And so I'm just wondering whether you can talk a little bit about this dilemma and what India needs to do for itself.
You see, I'll stretch this, okay? Now, environmentalists have always, I'm not an environmentalist, I run a business, so I can kind of see this from the outside. Environmentalists have always been criticized that, you know, we are going into a Mad Maxian future. There will be violence, there will be death, there will be disease, and there will be no water. And a lot of times people have said that you're actually defeating your own cause because it's not happening. Now, not to say that it's happening here, I think India is a country where this could happen. It could happen, be the first place for things to get really bad really fast. 25% of the population of this country is in drought. This is the second drought, okay? I wrote an article in 2012 saying that India is drought resilient, but not drought proof. I'm not sure if India is drought resilient anymore. Food production has gone into the negative. The previous session, I know this is kind of a manufacturing-oriented crowd. We're talking about big export hubs, a lot of manufacturing, call it what you may. We are a country of 1 billion people. If we go down that route, we have anyway neither measured nor accounted for our natural resources that nature gave to us, and the bounty was immense. I just think that we are at the precipice where we really fundamentally need to decide: are we going to make our surpluses out of production, or are we going to make our surpluses out of conservation? Because I don't think we can sustain this. I just read the stories that come out of Maharashtra. So their crop production has fallen by 80%. You know what people will do? They will come and sit here. And you're going to see, a lot of populism is back in fashion. I'll give you free this, I'll give you free that. I'll tell you why that is coming, because nothing is available. So, and climate change as a fact is irreversible. You cannot rework it. 30 years ago, a paper was written about perpetual El Nino. Okay, I'll give you a statistic. Between the year 1900 and 2000, there was one drought per decade. Between 2000 and 2015, I've seen 5. Every second year is almost an El Nino year, which means there's a high probability of drought. Not only your drought, When the Green Revolution happened, what the previous governments were able to balance out was, we went from a monsoon-oriented Kharif economy to having two seasons which were strong enough. So if one would fail my winter, my wheat crop was really the biggest revolution. Last year we saw our winter crop going. Ladies and gentlemen, a country that loses its food security loses total security. Okay, we are not China. China is a country where an organization like Falun Gong that used to do Tai Chi in the morning was destroyed. We are India. We are a democratic country. Every citizen is important. We cannot build or write statistics. We cannot wipe people off the face of the map. So this whole model of big, heavy, GDP-oriented engineering is not for us. I don't think it is. And if things like 14, 15 are going to happen at regular intervals, what can we do? Really, what are your choices? If there is no water, you can build whatever you want. That is what my greatest fear is, and I somehow feel that the alarm is not coming. You just need to go to Marathwada, where chief ministers are being chased out. There is nothing you can do. I think that there are two things, that could be done, and I'll talk about it. One is to understand that situation is dire, and that climate change is not a European or American problem. It is my problem. It is a problem of Gaya district in Bihar, of Saharsa. It is a problem of Shadipur Depot. It is a problem of the big mounds of garbage that are right outside Sonipat. It is our problem. And our poor will get even more desperate as we, people in this room, get better off, and they have nothing. They don't even have water to defecate. So I think that, as I said, there are two things can be done. One, create financial markets and weather derivatives where if there is a catastrophe here, you can get resources from outside. To really work on conservation-based surpluses as opposed to production-based. Thank you.
Thank you, Jatin. Mr. Duggal, you've been a bureaucrat for many years, and you've spent a lot of time in water resources. You've looked at these issues very, very closely. But can you respond to Jatin's warning, as it were, his dark prophecy about the dangers that India confronts if we don't immediately do something? I mean, this whole fight about whether we should ally with China to take on the West in terms of global climate change negotiations. But what is it that somebody like you, who's an expert and knows the problem deeply, what is it that you would do?
Thank you, Jyoti, for calling me an expert. Actually, I've never worked in the climate change or related areas. I'm more on what climate does to us, managing the disasters and so on and so forth. But having said that, we have three experts, Mr. Bhatt, Mr. Yadav, and of course, the Minister of Environment earlier, who said something. I'll raise some fundamental issues. It's very well to say that the problems are local, and we cannot have the entire world being a party to solutions. Is climate change an issue which India alone can handle? If that be so, why have the COP coming after periodically? You have the conference of parties, and then you reach certain agreements, and then you reach, okay, you commit $200 billion or $100 billion investment or so and so to develop the alternative sources of investment, which can also preserve the climate and also can ensure economic development. Why do as the former minister mentioned, why these four important countries in the world are meeting tomorrow? Actually, this is a very timely discussion. I'm talking of the basic countries, that is Brazil, South Africa, China, and India, and signing an agreement on control of emissions, on trying to reduce bring down the temperatures, growth in temperature to, from 3 point or whatever it is now to little lower. I don't think these two things are inseparable. What I, however, know is, and somebody raised a very good issue at the COP21, I was reading the documents thanks to this meet, that although the entire world believes that entire global community believes that climate can save the world. Is the world ready to save the climate? This is the conflict of interest. This is the conflict of interest. You have a huge economic agenda, and you do not have the coal was one example, I was Secretary of Steel. You do not have the alternative sources which can simultaneously preserve the climate, which can ensure that it does not bring in the hazards and disasters, and also ensure the economic growth. And we have not been able to find an answer.
So what's your answer? What's your answer?
My answer is, at local level, whatever India can do, there's a full-fledged policy on this. Whatever India can do, I think they've been doing. Where I think the stark reality would be, do your best, but you be ready for the disasters. You be ready for the floods in Chennai. You be ready for the floods in J&K. You be ready for the heat waves which can bring in whether the Zikas or the Ebolas or this thing. You be ready for all kinds of consequences and do your preparedness for that. So while you push the global agenda, while you do your local action, but at the same time, don't be smug that you've done it all and there will be no disasters. I have been part of this particular thing. Of course, as I said, I've been listening to experts more on the climate change. I was in Secretary Environment for about a year or so, but really speaking, I'm not an authority on this, but I know, having seen it all, that do as you may, it's a global issue. You put your resources, you develop your alternative investment systems, and simultaneously be ready to face the consequences in the coming decades.
I think Mr. Duggal's comments, my impression is that, it's more, he'd like India to dig its or her heels in and then deal with the challenges that come. And while I'd like you both to respond to that, Mr. Yadav, you've been a climate man for several decades. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how, in your experience over the last 25 or 30 years, how do you think climate has changed, A? And while you sit on top of this, of the Indian Meteorological Department, what do you think that policymakers should do? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the crisis that we are facing? Thank you.
Thank you. We all know that now climate change and global warming is a reality. You take different sets of data, you will get different results. Last 100 years, you will say temperature has risen by this much of degree centigrade, 0.8, 0.7. You come to last 50 years, the value will be different. You come to last 20, 30 years, the figure will be much different or much warmer, much alarming than if you take the average of last 50 years. In this current century, the top 14 warmest years across the globe are in this century. Then what this global warming is causing? One certain thing which is related to my department is that the frequency, the intensity, the distribution, the variability of the natural disasters is going to increase. And IMD or my ministry, the Prithvi or Science Ministry, can do what? Can we provide the good early warning system to these disasters? For that, we are prepared. India Meteorological Department under the aegis of Ministry of Earth Science are prepared. We have done almost everything to provide an early warning for whether it is cyclones or floods or monsoons or heat waves or other things. But my point is, providing early warning is not the only solution. Have we not provided early warning for J&K floods?
What about for Marathwada? Were you able to?
I'm coming. Have we not provided early warning for Uttarakhand floods or the Chennai floods? We did. We provided early warnings, heavy rainfall warnings. You may say, okay, they were not very specific, maybe point specific, time specific, but they were enough early warnings which can be acted upon. And here comes the role of smart managing our disasters. They are going to happen if we can manage these disasters smartly by reducing the impact, whether it is on loss of life or the property. Today's society, the modern society with high economic activity, is the most vulnerable to the loss due to these increased disasters. Coming to Marathwada, Marathwada is such a located at such a geographical location that it is always traditionally a drought-prone area, and moreover that the variation of the rainfall from one year to another year is so high that the frequency of droughts is once 2 years in every 5 years. So this is coming in semi-arid region, and monsoon is either heavy across the central India or the northeast India. So Marathwada comes at such a location that usually monsoon, slight change in the monsoon, I mean, this is a great change, a slight change in the monsoon pattern can give a mist to the Marathwada and this Telangana area. But we should do more to manage the droughts, the floods. Urban flooding has become a big issue these days. Mumbai rainfall, nobody should need a warning for 25 centimeter rainfall. It will happen every monsoon season, in every month of the June, every year July. We know it. We can only tell when it will happen, but it will happen every year. So can we prepare our system to meet at least the routine challenges? 25 centimeter, 24-hour rainfall will come in Mumbai at least 5 to 7 days during June and July. We are not well prepared even for the normal weather phenomena. What to talk of the extreme weather phenomena?
Thank you so much, Mr. Yadav. Jairam, to come back to you. So can you please respond to the following two questions? The first is Mr. Yadav's comment, is that we are not even prepared to handle localized phenomena like, sort of floods in Mumbai or the Marathwada drought. So A, that. And B, your earlier comment about environment versus economic growth. With our audience today, which is primarily an industry-based audience, what is it that industry can do? Or what is it that industry and government can do together?
Well, there's an old Upanishadic saying, Prakriti Rakshati Rakshataha. Nature protects those who protect her. If you tamper with nature, nature will, hell hath no fury, like nature unbound. Yeah, I mean, you see what happened if you build an Akshardham temple and if you have an art of living exposition on a floodplain of the Yamuna is going to react someday or the other. It's going to happen. It's already happened. So, I mean, most of natural disasters, most of weather-induced disasters that we think of, whether it's floods or whether it's drought or whether it's cyclones or whether it's tsunamis, are man-made. There's a lot of natural cyclical elements to it, but there's a lot of man-made interventions which lead to such situations. If you're going to destroy all your mangrove forests, for example, you're going to undoubtedly weaken your vulnerability, weaken your resilience against tsunami and cyclones and so on. So the most important thing that we must recognize is that our interventions cause the weaknesses in our resilient systems. It's not God-given. So whether it's a drought in Marathwada or whether it's a flood in Uttarakhand, look for the causes in the interventions that human beings themselves have made. Now the answer to your second question, what should industry be doing? It's very simple. Industry should just follow the laws of the land. I know this is not fashionable in this country. We take great delight in passing laws, and we take greater delight in bypassing them subsequently. And if industry were to just follow the laws of the land, follow environmental rules, follow environmental standards, follow environmental regulations, we won't have half the problems that we end up having. So whether it's in the transportation sector, whether it's in the industrial sector, whether it's in the building sector, I think India has some of the most progressive legislation. India has some of the most progressive rules and standards and laws. But unfortunately, the enforcement of these laws, whether you see the Ganga, whether you see the Yamuna,
whether you see in the protection of our forests, or whether you see the pollution, you feel the pollution in Delhi, this is all reflective of a breakdown in the regulatory system. And I think the worst thing that Indian industry can do, I know my friend Sunil Munjal is a great champion of this point of view, and I hope at the end of this session he will change his mind. Environment is not a regulatory burden. Environment is a responsibility that industry and society have to jointly, and government have to jointly undertake. It's not in the name of ease of doing business. You've just had Amitabh Kant in the previous session, a believer that in the name of ease of doing business, remove all environmental regulations in this country. This is a recipe for unmitigated disaster, and I'm afraid we are headed on that road. In the name of improving competitiveness, in the name of increase of ease of doing business, we are about to dismantle the entire edifice of environmental regulation, and that is going to cause more problems in the future than we can actually anticipate today.
Now, it's nice to hear a cheer from the audience, especially when the audience is being criticized by a former minister, but I'm sure we'll get some questions in that regard. But Jatin, now, when Jairam Ramesh was minister, and I remember that he was on the other side of the American argument, which was that India and China, as leading representatives of the developing world, within quotes, must do much more to mitigate the effects of climate change. Jairam Ramesh was then resisting that India should do much more. Yes, you were. But let me, no, okay, one second. No, one second. No, hold on a second. So I'm asking you, Jatin, to talk to us a little bit about what is it that, do you think that India and China, so the argument being that India's per capita emissions are much lower because we have a large population. But if you look at the one segment of the Indian population, which is perhaps the upper middle class, or which actually pollutes about as much as large parts of America does. So because we have a much larger population, we get away with the per capita emission argument. So I want you to tell us, what is it that, so why should we be, tell us, what do you think we should do as Indians so that we can get out of that confrontation? What should India as an emerging power do?
On a larger philosophical point, I think calling ourselves an emerging power is a disconnect. We are not an emerging power, neither should we try. We should try to feed ourselves fully, and that is good enough for all of us. Anyway, that's said and done. Okay, now, what should we do? Climate change, if we try to reduce our emissions, we try to get some kind of semblance in our natural systems, we are not saving the world, we're saving ourselves. I've said this before, I'm saying that again. This is for us, not for them. We are a country where the wealth extremes are massive, and unfortunately, we have imported a colonial import of GDP, that the more we consume, the better off we are. That's what we said. 100 million people or so in this country live like Americans do. Imagine if the next 400 million start doing that. If you look at all the statistics of carbon and ocean temperature and ice melting, it all starts after 1980. The Chinese reform started after 1980. Do you really want to undergo all of that again? At some point of time, we should lead the effort to contain the impact of climate change. I would imagine that an economic surplus created in some countries, an economic surplus only for a short period of time. Again, this whole argument about China keeps on coming up. This is like a Wall Street argument. Does anybody know what really goes on there? Really, how do people live? This is a place where, as I said, you can wipe out cities. Are they really, is that political order really sustainable? I know that sustainable growth in agriculture and industrial are terms that have been used for a long time, but we really need to create an architecture that is born in this country. And what did we do? First, we take away the land. That's what the upper caste did. Then what? We took away the water, and now I'll take away the air. And then I say that let's give you economic development. This is a recipe for disaster for a country as big as India. Again, these are philosophical points. From an engineering point of view, I don't know if we can terraform Earth and become cooler. But I know, as leaders in this room, if we consume less, we will create surpluses that could be given away to reduce rural distress. When Gandhi came to India, his first success was with the indigo plantations in Champaran. Okay, he was the one who created, took the hinterland and made it a national movement. And somehow I think we keep on forgetting about this. The organized labor workforce in India is puny compared to the other unorganized labor workforce who literally lives off the land. The single biggest working group in this country is probably sharecroppers and women, okay, where no government subsidy reaches, who are completely, their lives are rain-fed. I'm thank God after Manrega that things actually start moving and people were able to sustain it. I mean, Manrega came after 2004, 2 bad droughts, 2002 and 04. We cannot hijack, fast growth for whom is a question we really need to answer. If you go to Maharashtra Assembly, I'm amazed, for all the negative publicity that politicians get, every member, I've been to the Nagpur session, I've been to Bombay, is worried about migration. So once these people start coming, where will they sleep? Where will I get the water from? It's very real. Actually, among the so-called urban upper class that lives the American lifestyle, this is not a conversation. It is a conversation about Nana Patekar and Amir Khan, how much money they're giving to a village. We take away from them at a subsidized cost because they have no access. And I don't know, I just do not want India over the next 20 years, become like a South American country where you have a small group of people having great resources and a large group of people having nothing, not even what nature used to offer 100 years ago. So that's my submission.
Thanks, Jatin. I'm going to open this. I'm going to open up the debate to the House. So, yes, sir. If you could please identify yourself. No, yes. If you could identify yourself and ask.
I am Grover from Amity University. There are several low-cost models for conservation of water. Anna Hazare's village is an example. There was a movie, Manji, which also speaks on the same subject. Why can't these be identified and implemented all over the country instead of relying on big projects, water dams, etc.? Thank you.
You see, one of the biggest challenges which India faces is water management. Examples are given of Marathwada. I have served for a year in Telangana. I have seen massive floods, 2006 in the same region, and I've also seen droughts in the same area. And then you do whatever last minute you do, you give this relief, that relief, 1,000 crores, 500 crores, this thing, that thing. It's a kind of more a management issue. Now, India has a precipitation of 4,000 billion cubic meters. The actual usage on ground is, I think, it was 800 to probably 850 BCMs. I am 100% with you, but I also know what happens on ground. I wish some of you were sitting and doing the annual budgetary or financial planning, where there is tremendous conflict of interest as to where you want to give or invest more. People have gone to Israel, and I think the first visit was probably in the 50s or 60s when Israel came into being, on these sprinkler systems, on water preservation, on growing crops, on low water consumption. It's not an easy thing. In India, the challenges are met as they come, but in long term, as I said earlier, and I think another speaker had endorsed that view, that there will be a permanent conflict between the so-called GDP, economic growth, and so-called industrialization, and conservation, preservation, and utilization of local resources. Such models are available all over. It's not only this thing, but water management is one of the key areas on which I think we can take that 800 to 1600 BCs. A lot of research has been done. It is nothing original. And then we can be, see, I tell you, Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji was very keen on interlinking of rivers, avoid floods, and take the water to the basins in which there's a paucity of water. And today, when you have to implement it on ground, even a tehsil will not give their water to any other,
So
to the
is
neighboring tehsil.
interlinking of rivers a good idea or not?
No, it's not practical. It's a fantastic idea. It has been done successfully in the United States. It's been done successfully in Australia. But it's not practical out here when there are basins which are facing shortages or occasional shortage. You go and you ask them to divert your water. I'm telling you, we signed an agreement between Ken and Betwa. And then it fell out through local agitation. I know what troubles we went through in just building the height of Sardar Sarovar Dam. There was huge agitation led by that lady, what was her name? Somebody will know that from Maharashtra. Meera Patkar. You know, I mean, they were this thing. I said, listen, 6 to 8,000 villages are going to get water. For God's sake, we'll give 1,000 crores to Madhya Pradesh or 500 crores, and let's resettle these 8 villages. So water is you know, when all papers in water resources ministries, we used to write, future wars will be fought over water. And then you justify the whole thing.
Right. So before I ask the gentleman in the dark jacket to ask his question, I'm wondering if perhaps we can hear from industry what industry and government can do together so that India can get out of this permanent conflict that my panelists have been talking about. Yes, sir, please introduce yourself, and if you could say who you would like to ask the question to.
Kumar, former Indian ambassador. My question is to Mr. Jairam Ramesh. COP21 Paris Agreement brought on board 190 countries. There must be something good in this. But sir, do you think shift on the part of big polluters, and Western countries always include India and China in that, is really possible without transfer of technology and funds? Our Prime Minister has been talking about great emphasis on renewable sources of energy and so much wind energy, solar energy. But adequate transfer of funds and technology must. Without that, I don't think any country like India and China with a lot of coal available will really make shift. Thank you.
Well, this is the traditional Indian view that you guys polluted, we now have a right to pollute, number one. And number two, if you want us to clean up, give us the money and give us the technology. This has been the traditional Indian view for the last 25 years. And I think this is a wrong view. It's a very short-sighted view, and it's a view that you really need to get out of the box. The reason for that is what our young friend said, that we may not have caused the problem of climate change, but the vulnerability to climate change as far as India is concerned is maximum. Whether it's the monsoon, whether it's the glaciers, whether it's deforestation, whether it's the rise in mean sea level, there is no country in the world that has the vulnerability to climate change that India has. And therefore, India cannot take the position, give us the money, give us the technology, and then we will do what we have to do. So I think we need to show the world the leadership. We need to show the world the leadership in consumption that he has talked about. We need to show the world the leadership in production. There is no reason why Germany, which has no sun for 6 months in a year, why Germany should be the world leader in solar energy. There's no reason why India cannot be the world leader in solar energy. And we have been making some efforts, and I'm hopeful that by 2025, we will be number one as far as solar energy is concerned. Now, solar energy by itself is not the magic wand, but it's one route that we should be taking. So I think the route that is being suggested, you give us money, you give us technology, and then we'll clean up, that's a route for continued confrontation between the developed countries and developing countries. We need to do things on our own. I think an economy that's growing at 7.5% per year can generate the resources on its own. We can develop the technology on our own, as we have shown in different areas. And this notion that we are going to be perennially borrowers of money and borrowers of technology for climate change is a completely misplaced and outdated notion.
You know,
Just because I got it right. This pledge about putting in, well, it was initially thought to be 200 billion, then I don't know what finally came out was 100 billion on development and transfer of technologies which can reduce emissions, which can do this thing and still keep the production levels moving, call them green technologies or whatever it is. That was the issue, I suppose, whether that way we can move, India can move, or it has to be dependent on the West to move because our technologies are not so well developed so far. I think that is something which we should be sensitized about.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
Can I respond to what both of you said? And these are Indian examples, and I'll give you our own examples, what has been going on in our own group. 40 years ago, in Hero Cycles, we put up an effluent treatment plant. No legislation, it was not fashionable. In fact, the technology was not known. We actually had to sit down with some engineer from Chandigarh and actually design the plant. We started using water-based paints a long time ago, discontinued asbestos-based baking medium a long time ago. Our plant in Haridwar has one of the largest green roofs in the world. The plant at Neemrana we opened recently generates 2 megawatts from the roof of the building, and the space below the solar panels is used to grow food and plants through hydroponics. All the food being cooked in the cafeteria is grown on the roof of the building. These are all completely Indian solutions. There's stuff which is going on here. And there's no magic to it, by the way. It's all known. So it's just getting down to doing this. The point of getting clean coal technology and technologies which are more advanced than ours, of course it's sensible, by the way. We should get them as well. But that's not the only answer. So what I'm saying is that both of them are saying is right. We have enough right now to get on and do our stuff. But it helps if you get new technology which is more efficient, which is more economical, and which is already known to be functioning. And based on that, we can continue to develop our own, as we are doing now. I think the answer is to do both. Consumption, and that's the point Jatin made. We need to focus on consumption as well. How do we become more efficient? Because when there is availability and there's no constraint, you actually tend to waste. You talked of the Americans, but the Americans are not just biggest consumers. They're also the biggest wasters in the world of all resources. So we have grown up in an environment of shortages. So being frugal comes somewhat naturally to us. So we actually have an advantage there.
Jyoti, I must just one minute.
Okay.
Give me one thing.
And I'm saying we are not doing enough of this right now, but we need to figure out how do you spread this into a much more widespread trend rather than exceptions.
Okay, Mr. Ramesh is far more experienced in this field than I am. I only worked for a year, and one of the areas which I handled was what you just mentioned. You see, a few swallows don't make a summer. For one hero, there are 100 defaulters. And we did a national survey under the CPCB. And if it was left to the laws, we'll be closing down 80% of the industry around the country. You know, we have a full system of the clearance of the environment impact and the various things in the Ministry of Environment. And ultimately, it was decided with the approval of the government, okay, let's meet midway. Let's not close. I mean, you talk of hero, I'm talking of the leather industry in Calcutta. I'm talking of the leather industry in Hyderabad. I'm talking of the industries in Assam. I visited physically. They said, sir, close kar dijiye. Tell the CPCB to order the State Pollution Control Board to close it. That's not the answer too. So, sir, we started an initiative called CREP, which was the Corporate Responsibility on Environment Protection, which was, okay, what best you can do, like you have said, being innovative, importing of certain technologies, and at least reducing the level of pollution and reducing the level of environment corruption that is being done by your industry. But as I said, it needs a view from and the implementation from the top and to be taken to the bottom.
Thank you. Jatin, very quick response, and then one last question, because time is up, I'm afraid. So, Jatin.
I think that the market is where India's problem, can be solved. As I said, the market itself should be used to give solutions. One, there's a beautiful act called Central Electricity Act of 2003 that came out, which talked about open access. We talked about privatization. I think the natural price, the market pricing of natural resources is the way to go. I think every utility in this country should be privatized because we are in a bizarre situation where the DHBVN and all of Gurgaon is running on diesel fuel, whereas there is surplus energy that cannot come. Or if or UPSEB cannot be efficient and people are running Noida on diesel, and plus there is surplus power. So, I mean, we are probably the only country apart from Saudi Arabia that runs cities on diesel. I mean, even Pakistan could, the Karachi utility could be privatized. I don't understand why can't we. Second, I think water should be privatized. I think the fact that the whole political economy around water, and anyway it is private, the bottle you're drinking private water, why can't there be people who actually, like, in England, take your sewage and give you water and people pay for it? I think a lot of conservation, a lot of efficiency will come from that. I also believe that if we want to reduce rural distress, as I said, we have to contribute to the global catastrophic markets, which will give us their surpluses when we are in distress, and which could mean issuing cat bonds. And of course, the PMFBY is a very welcome step in that direction. Thank you.
Okay, the last question from the gentleman at the back. But very concise question, please. No, not you, the gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Thanks, Jyoti. So my question is basically regarding when we talk about carbon emission, why we don't talk about the hygiene condition, because burning of garbage is very common across cities, villages, everywhere. So we always point out at industry, whereas each one of us pollute. And there is no measurement of carbon emission because of that. And also because of open drains, like methane, which is getting generated.
Okay, I think we can just perhaps bunch a couple of questions together.
Malhotra from JK Organization.
Okay.
A lot has been talked about what industry should do, and rightly so. My question is that in every report of the government, when we have encountered the laws, which Jairam rightly said, we have enough, and we have updated laws in regard to protecting the environment. In all reports, it's the implementing authorities, the controlling authorities, the regulatory authorities who are the main defaulters. And the nation must concentrate on getting proper enforcement. And I do not agree to this, that climate change is not reversible. I feel that we should concentrate on growing trees. We should, for every economic development activity, simultaneously concentrate on the environment, and would like to have the views of Jairam particularly.
Okay, so you're putting the ball right back into the court of the regulatory or policy-making authorities. Absolutely the last question. So will you ask your question, sir? Yeah.
Well, my name is Sanjoy Day. It is not a question, actually. It is an observation that I made over the last 40 years. An Englishman was telling his Indian business friend about his lawn, garden. My lawn is old, very, very old, 300 years or more, I'm told. My lawn is old, very, very old, 300 years or more, I'm told. It heard the news of Waterloo, and it saw the Roundheads marching through.
Okay.
The Indian looked at the lawn and told the British man, the lawn is wonderful, the grass is flat and nice. Next year, I'll have a lawn like that.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Day. Jairam, you have the last word.
Well, I mean, I don't know what to say. A large number of questions that have been raised. I think the real challenge for us is enforcement. I agree with you. It's enforcement is the key. Enforcement without fear, enforcement without favor, enforcement transparently, enforcement without looking at who the person is. The polluter must pay, irrespective of whether it's the government or whether it's a private industry or whether it's some godman. I mean, the law should be blind. It should be completely enforced, as I said, transparently. We've taken some steps in this direction. The National Green Tribunal was one small step further. We need to reform some of our executive organizations to ensure transparency in implementation. But I generally agree with you that the structure of laws and regulations and standards is in place, and we need to have better institutions, a better set of incentives for people to follow the law and disincentives for people not to follow the law. I mean, you must have both a structure of incentives and disincentives as well. I think the environmental consciousness in this country is growing. It's very good that people are getting more and more conscious. And one of the reasons why environmental consciousness is growing is because of the public health impact. Increasingly, pollution is having a public health impact. Contamination is having a public health impact. Deforestation is having a public health impact. And that's one of the reasons why both people and governments are also becoming very sensitive to environmental issues. I think India is at a historic turning point. It's at a crossroads. One road is fast economic growth without environmental protection. Another is fast economic growth with environmental protection and conservation. And I hope we take the latter road. It's a more difficult road to take because there are a lot of trade-offs and a lot of choices to be made, which we may or may not like. But I think that's the road that we need to go down on.
Thank you, Jairam. I think Mr. Duggal, you'd like to say?
No, I'll just like to make one point that, we should not get out of this room with a sense of despair or despondency. I mean, alongside, as Mr. Ramesh has brought out, the consciousness about environment, I must bring it on record in this hall that so also is the preparedness and a tremendous growth in preparedness for meeting the disasters that, climate change or such related issues can cause. I think Jairam ji was then the minister in 2004 when tsunami happened, and I was inducted as Home Secretary immediately thereafter. And within a year, 2006, I think INCOAS had installed the tsunami warning system. It gives a warning for over nearly half an hour for the residents on the most threat is from the Bay of Bengal side, and everybody is safe. This gentleman, he knows I used to spend hours in his office in the IMD. Lakshman was then the DG, and my fellow who was reporting to me was Malhotra. You go back to the Odisha cyclone of 1999, the great cyclone, and you go back to Phylin. And I tell you, Phylin, the IMD guys, I can tell you, if somebody deserved the biggest award, it is them. They pinpointed where it will land, with what wind surge it will land, at what time it will land, and we were 1000% prepared. As against thousands of lives lost, hardly any life was lost and people were evacuated. And the Americans were wrong. The point is, what I'm trying to say is, yes, environmental consciousness growth is important, no question about it. Alternative energies, alternative this thing must be done. Corporate must take the responsibility, government must do its own, but I can tell you India is a very complex administration. We will keep trying and we will still continue to face the challenges. All I want you to know is that the preparedness, creation of National Disaster Response Force, in a jiffy, 2005 we created it, wherever it happens, not only here, and they have brought in kudos from all over the world. So I don't think that, while we must do our best, but we also must be prepared for something which befalls us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duggal. On behalf of my panel, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this exhilarating discussion. And I hope that my panel has been able to jog the conscience of many of us in this room.
Can we have a huge round of applause? That was very thought-provoking. And ma'am, it actually gave me a jolt because Mother's Day is right up next. We buy presents for Mother's Day, but what about Mother Earth? Mother Nature, that's what we need to take care of. I think so. We all should take initiative. I would request none other than Mr. Sunil Khan Munjal to kindly grace the stage and present the mementos to our brilliant panelists. Can we have a round of applause? First and foremost, can you all please come? Mr. Jatin Singh. Mr. Vinod Kumar Duggal. Can we have a huge round of applause for Mr. Jairam Ramesh? Dr. B.P. Yadav. And Ms. Jyoti Malhotra. Can we have a big round of applause for this session, please?